Imagine a mother, a teacher, who's dedicated her life to her family and her students. But when a ruthless group of thugs targets her family, everything she's worked for is put at risk. What makes it worse? She's blind. But this isn't just any teacher. Behind her calm demeanor lies an unshakable strength that has seen her through tough times before. When the threats escalate and her family's safety is in serious danger, the unexpected happens. Her past comes crashing into her present, and the FBI tactical team is called in to protect her. But the thugs won't back down without a fight. Will the team get there in time? Or will this brave teacher's darkest hour turn into a battle she can't win? Stay tuned. For years, Sarah Mitchell had built a quiet life in a small suburban neighborhood, teaching history to high school students and raising her two kids on her own. Her blindness, a result of a rare genetic condition, never stopped her from living life to the fullest. She had learned to navigate the world through touch, sound, and intuition, relying on her sharp mind and the support of her close-knit community. But when a group of local criminals, looking to settle an old score, targeted her home, Sarah's world turned upside down. The threats started small, taunting messages and ominous phone calls. But things escalated quickly. The moment they dared to show up at her doorstep, Sarah knew this was no ordinary threat. Something darker, something dangerous, was on the horizon. As Sarah sat in her living room, the hum of her guide dog's collar, the only sound breaking the silence, she heard it again. Someone pacing outside. Her hand instinctively reached for the phone, but she hesitated. The police had already been alerted. Twice. They'd assured her it was just a misunderstanding, a case of harassment she could handle. But she knew better. The feeling in her gut told her this was no coincidence. Across town, her son Jake, a Marine recently back from deployment, was battling his own demons. He barely adjusted to civilian life before hearing about the threats against his mother. But there was something that didn't sit right with him. His instincts, honed from years in combat, told him this wasn't random. Someone knew exactly how to push Sarah's buttons, how to break her. What scared him the most was the possibility that whoever was behind this might be someone she knew, someone she trusted. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the tension. Sarah's pulse quickened. She knew who it was, but she also knew this wasn't a friendly visit. Her instincts screamed at her to stay calm. She reached for the pepper spray she kept on the counter, just in case. The door creaked open slowly, but what she saw sent a chill through her. Two men, standing just beyond the threshold, their eyes cold, their smirks unsettling. One of them stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Time's up, Mrs. Mitchell." The air grew thick with tension as Sarah stood frozen, the cold grip of fear tightening around her chest. Her fingers trembled around the pepper spray, but she kept her hand steady, refusing to show weakness. She couldn't afford to. Not now. The man who spoke took another step forward, and the door seemed to close in on her, trapping her between him and the darkness outside. "You should have left well enough alone," the man sneered, his voice dripping with menace. Sarah's mind raced. She knew they weren't here for money. This was personal. She couldn't see their faces, but she could sense their every movement, the way their breaths quickened as they closed in. Behind her, in the silence of the house, her son Jake was already making his move. He'd been watching from a distance, his protective instincts kicking in the moment he got word. He was no stranger to danger, but this wasn't a battlefield. This was his mother's home, the place he'd sworn to protect. His hand tightened around the grip of the gun tucked into his waistband. He moved swiftly, quietly, praying he wouldn't be too late. As Sarah's mind raced, she forced her voice to sound calm. "I don't know what you want, but if you think I'm scared." The man cut her off with a laugh, his dark eyes glinting with malice. You're already scared. You just don't know it yet. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of sirens wailed in the distance. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Were they here? Could it be the FBI team Jake had called in? The thugs didn't seem fazed, but they weren't about to let their plan be interrupted. In a swift motion, one of them reached for a weapon. But before the situation could spiral further, the sound of boots pounding on the gravel outside signaled that someone else was closing in, faster than anyone anticipated. The tension hung in the air, and Sarah felt her heart racing in sync with the pounding steps. Time was running out. The sound of heavy footsteps grew louder, but then, to Sarah's shock, it abruptly stopped. The man in front of her tensed, his gaze flickering to the door, as if sensing something was wrong. Sarah's mind raced, her pulse pounding in her ears. Was it the FBI? No, they couldn't have arrived so soon. Then why had the men suddenly gone still? Her answer came as the door to her house swung open with a violent crash, but it wasn't law enforcement that poured in. The two men in front of her froze, and their faces twisted in disbelief. Standing in the doorway was someone Sarah had never expected to see again. Her ex-husband, Mark. He had vanished years ago, leaving her to raise their children alone. The last time she'd seen him, it was under less than friendly circumstances. "Mark?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Was he here to help or to make things worse? Mark's eyes scanned the room with cold calculation, his face drawn, his expression unreadable. He didn't look like the man she once knew. He looked dangerous, like someone who had learned how to survive in a world she couldn't even begin to understand. He didn't acknowledge her question, instead fixing his gaze on the thugs blocking the way. "These men work for me," Mark said flatly, his voice low and devoid of emotion. The revelation hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Her ex-husband, the man who had once promised to protect her, was somehow connected to the very people threatening her family. The realization that she'd been living under a lie for so many years left her breathless. But even more unsettling was the chill that ran down her spine when she saw the smirk on Mark's face. The same smirk he'd worn when he had betrayed her all those years ago. The two thugs, visibly rattled by Mark's appearance, began to lower their weapons, but the tension in the room remained thick. Sarah's mind spun with confusion and disbelief. Was this all some twisted game? Or had Mark orchestrated this from the very beginning? One thing was certain, things were about to get even more dangerous. Before she could process the full extent of the betrayal, a sharp knock echoed from the back of the house. Someone else was coming, and this time, it didn't sound like a rescue. The floor creaked under the weight of approaching footsteps, and Sarah's heart sank even lower. Who else was involved in this mess? And what did they want from her now? The door swung open again with a deafening creak, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she turned toward the sound. Her mind struggled to keep up with the chaos, but everything shifted into focus when a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Step away from her, Mark." "Jake." Her son's commanding voice rang out, sharp and unwavering. He stood in the doorway, a silhouette of strength, his uniform still fresh from his deployment. His eyes, hardened by war, locked onto his father. Mark's face faltered for just a moment, just enough for Sarah to see the uncertainty creeping into his features. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He squared his shoulders, trying to mask his vulnerability with a sneer. "You brought the military in to save your precious mother." Mark's voice was a low growl. "You think I'm scared of you?" Jake didn't flinch. "No, but you should be scared of what comes next." Before Mark could react, the sound of sirens reached a deafening crescendo, and the FBI tactical team stormed in from the back. They were swift, efficient, their presence like a wall between Sarah's family and the chaos that threatened to consume them. The agents moved with military precision, surrounding the thugs and Mark in an instant. "Hands on the floor, now." An agent barked. "Mark," she whispered, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "What did you do?" Mark's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was something far darker. "You think you've won, Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But you haven't seen the full picture yet." Suddenly, everything made sense. The way things had escalated so quickly, the strange behavior, the sense that they were being played. Sarah's breath hitched as the weight of Mark's words sunk in. She wasn't just a target. She was part of a much larger scheme, one that went far deeper than the thugs who had come to her door. Before she could process it, an explosion shook the ground beneath them, rocking the house on its foundation. The FBI agents dove for cover, pulling Sarah and Jake to the floor as the sound of shattering glass and twisting metal filled the air. Mark's smirk widened. "You thought this was over. Welcome to the real game, Sarah. This is just the beginning." In that instant, Sarah realized the horrifying truth. The battle for her family's survival was far from over. It had only just begun. The explosion's aftermath was chaos, but Sarah's mind raced with clarity. With the FBI securing the perimeter, the truth finally dawned on her. Mark had been working with the criminals all along, setting up the perfect storm to tear her family apart. But he underestimated one thing: the resilience of a mother who would stop at nothing to protect her own. Jake's quick thinking and the FBI's rapid response had turned the tide, but the damage was done. Mark was arrested, his plan thwarted. As Sarah held her son close, she realized the past would always haunt her, but she had the strength to face it head-on. In the end, it wasn't just the tactical team that saved her family. It was her love, her courage, and the unbreakable bond she shared with those she held dear. And that, she knew, was the greatest weapon of all.